Today, what my big goal is in light of next week being our midterm exam, we will finish up one way or the other this discussion on introduction to enterprise information systems. So either when we get to 4 o'clock, we will call it done so that we can move on to another discussion in the future, or if we happen to wrap up before 4 o'clock, at that point we'll just declare ourselves to be done for the day, because this is where we will draw the line for the midterm at the end of our course material for today. Okay? Any questions you guys have about anything? Yes, ma'am.
Now, are most of the slides posted online? I know we have I think the business intelligence, but I'm not sure if this one was or like silos.
I don't remember. Can any of you answer that? Are these slides out there available for you? If not, I will make them available to you. The slides I have, though, will not have the things on it that I have written in. So, but I'm more than happy to make available the slides themselves. Okay, I will do that after class today. Other questions? Anything else I can share with you? Remember that really in this class, the major portion of your grade comes from the midterm and final exams. So although homework and quizzes and such are important, where you really see the most points pile up is on the exam. So make sure that you prepare well. The good news is if you do prepare well, it will definitely be the kind of exam that you can do well on. So your work will be worth its while. Last call for preliminary questions. Anything I can do for you or share with you would be helpful.
The exam covers both the slides and the material we had for reading.
It covers everything we have done to this point. So hypothetically, there might be some questions related to your lab work. There would be questions for sure related to our readings. There will be questions definitely that come from our slide-related discussions. So yes, all of that is fair game for the exam.
How long is the exam?
You will have 90 minutes to take the exam, although depending upon how quickly you work, I suspect that some people will finish in much less time than that. At the moment, I have not finalized the exam, so I can't tell you exactly how many questions it will have on it, though. Okay. Other questions? All right, so although we have covered really quite a lot of material in our discussion to this point this semester, we are still in this discussion, the slide set Introduction to Enterprise Information Systems, which has quite the varied set of topics in it for us to discuss of what I would consider to be a foundational nature. Where we left off last time and where we'll pick up this time, this is on slide 9 that you'll see when you can download the slide deck. I wanted to give you a formal definition of what enterprise resource planning is, because we have given you several informal definitions to this point, but not a formal one. And I want to acknowledge that this particular definition does come from a book written by Wallace and Kremzar called ERP Making It Happen. And what I particularly like about this definition is it incorporates really several different characteristics of what it means when we talk about enterprise resource planning. And before I give you this definition, what I want to talk about for a moment here is where enterprise resource planning came from. In the context of playing ERP Sim, you may recall that when we were playing the game that involved the distribution of bottles of water, one of the transactions that we ran was called MRP. And MRP actually stood for Materials Requirements Planning. And that particular software tool was created very early in business management processes as a way of helping an organization manage their purchasing process. And the fundamental idea behind MRP, as you've seen, if you can recall what you did in your lab exercises, was we look at what it is that we plan on selling, and then based on what it is that we plan on selling, we decide how much to order. And fundamentally, it's not really that complicated. If we're planning on selling 800 bottles of lemon-flavored water, and we have 300 bottles of lemon-flavored water in stock, I think an elementary school student could probably tell us, well, you need to order 500 more bottles in order to have enough to fulfill your sales forecast. It gets much more complicated when we start doing things like saying, next quarter we're going to sell 1,000 pickup trucks, and we have to actually make those pickup trucks from scratch. So how many fan belts do we need to order, and how many bolts do we need to order, and how many pipe assemblies do we need to order? This can get pretty complicated in real-world application, but the idea behind MRP was we look at what it is that we want to create as an organization, and then we use the computer to help us figure out what we need to buy. Well, that became very, very established in business as a software tool that companies were using, and the idea came that maybe we could extend the utility of that a little bit further. And instead of just focusing on what it is that we need to purchase, maybe we could create a tool that would help us not just manage the planning of materials requisitions, but we could manage all of the resources of our organization. And so that's where this idea of enterprise resource planning came from. And so the idea was we're going to create a set of tools that, first of all, would be used across the entire scope of our organization. So this wouldn't just be used in the manufacturing plant or just used by salespeople like we talked about in earlier discussions. It would be used across a wide variety of functional areas in our organization. And beyond that, this enterprise resource planning tool that we were creating would not only allow us to establish data linkages within our company, it would also allow us to link together with our suppliers and with our customers to create a complete chain of being able to exchange information. This is related to the concept and a term that you might have seen before called a value chain. And so the idea here is if I'm going to have my computer system figure out what it is that I need to order, why don't I just go ahead and have it place the order for me with my suppliers? That's certainly something that the computer could automate, and we could create logic that might say once a week, query all of our suppliers and download a current price list. And then when we know what we want to order, look at the price list for all of the different suppliers, find the supplier that has the lowest price, and place the order with them. That would be a very simple computer program to write, very straightforward algorithm. And so one of the ideas behind ERP is it not just being used to automate data flow within our organization, but being able to link together with our customers. So imagine, for example, what happens with Amazon. I don't know if you've ever noticed this when you've placed an order with Amazon, but sometimes when you look at a particular item, it will say this item ships immediately. Other times it will say this item will ship within a week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks. It'll specify a time frame. Well, that's because Amazon is telling you, when they tell you that they don't actually have the item that you want in stock. So what happens is you place the order with Amazon and they turn around and place that order with their supplier and then get the item in and ship it to you. So you see in that scenario, really this linking together of this value chain where we could use a computer to get information from our customers, process it in terms of our business processes, automatically exchange information with our suppliers, and do this without people having to be directly involved in this. The benefit of that is it becomes very, very efficient. And when we see things that become very, very efficient, it becomes very, very cost effective, which is very, very good for our customers because then they can get things at a lower price point, they can get things quicker. So the benefits here are really quite obvious. One of the things that we will talk about in a few different dimensions in our time together today is this idea of when you buy an enterprise resource planning tool, what you are buying is a particular company's take on how you should execute your business processes. So, for example, SAP makes and markets ERP systems. Oracle makes and markets ERP systems. Microsoft makes and markets ERP systems. And there are a wide array of other companies, both large and small, that make these kinds of products. Well, when you buy these products from these companies, they come with, if you will, default ways of doing certain things. This is the way we think you should order products. This is the way we think you should run your shipping operation in your warehouse. And we've talked before about this idea of business processes. So when you buy an ERP package from SAP, in order to make your life easier, SAP will have created in that software a set of business processes that they are suggesting to you are the best way for you to run your business. Now, it's up to you whether you want to accept those default business processes or you want to change them to be reflective of your own way of doing business. And you read an article, I think, for last week that talked a little bit about that, and we'll say more about that as we go along here. But one of the things that distinguishes Microsoft's product from Oracle's product, from SAP's product, and so on, is what those default business processes are. Which is why whenever a company is going to buy one of these products, you want to look at all the different choices from all the different vendors to find the one that matches up with your organization most significantly. We've talked about, particularly last week, when we talked about the topic of business intelligence, how the goal of an ERP system is to support effective decision making in an organization. And one of the ways that it does that is this idea of providing this high cross-functional integration. And we did the lab exercises, a lab exercise a few weeks ago that was designed to illustrate to you how frustrating it can be in an organization when the different functional parts of the company don't communicate directly with one another and can't easily share information. So an ERP system is designed to resolve that, enabling people to run their businesses with high level of customer service and productivity while simultaneously lowering costs and inventory. So very, very good definition that incorporates really a wide dimension of facets of what ERP is. It's an enterprise-wide set of management tools providing the ability to link suppliers and customers into a complete chain, employing proven business processes, supporting effective decision-making, providing high cross-functional integration among sales, marketing, manufacturing, operations, logistics, purchasing, finance, and human resources, enabling people to run their businesses with high levels of customer service and productivity while simultaneously lowering costs and inventories. What do you not see in that definition that might have been expected? Obviously, there's lots of ways to answer that question. There's a lot of things that aren't in that definition. But what's something based on your experience, even in this class, that you might have expected to see there that's not?
Like report analytics.
Analytics, okay. There is certainly no direct reference to analytics there. I would suggest that probably this reference to effective decision making hints at that, but you're definitely right. There's no direct reference to analytics here. What else is missing? What's that? Vendors, okay, there's no reference here to vendors, and I think we had a quiz question that made the observation that most of the time when companies employ and implement an ERP system, they're going to purchase it from a vendor, like we were talking about a moment ago here. What's that? Information storage, there's no reference. Let's kind of keep going that direction. There's no reference to information storage, but what other things of that sort is there also no reference to at all? I don't see the word computer or software or technology up there at all. And the fact is, although it would be very, very hard, you can have ERP without having computers. ERP, and this is a key point that I want to make sure we understand, ERP fundamentally is not about technology. ERP is about a way of doing business. And that way of doing business is this idea that we're going to have this free exchange of information. We're going to make sure that everybody in our organization has access to the information they need. We're going to make sure all the different functional areas of our company operate cooperatively. But technically speaking, we could do that without employing technology. Now, there's no good reason for us to do that. You could decide this afternoon that you want to write a book, and you could certainly sit down with a pad of paper and a pencil and start writing the great novel that you have in your brain, but that probably is not the best way to go about it. You're probably going to want to type it on a laptop or a computer. But the fact is, you could write a book without using a computer. You could employ ERP and the idea behind ERP without using a computer. The fact is, though, we have come to associate this with the use of technology because in an organization of any size at all, the only way you're going to be able to do this is through the use of computer hardware and software. But the big idea I want you to get is this is not really a statement about technology. It's a statement about the way that we are going to do business. We are not going to allow what we showed before, this idea of there being silos of information that are kept only in different functional areas of our company, and we're not going to have each of the different functional areas hoard information. We're going to break down those castles of isolation. We're going to break down these silos of data storage, and we are going to operate like a truly interconnected company that exchanges information for the sake of making people more capable at doing their jobs and improving our relationship with our customers and helping people be more productive and at the same time lowering our cost as an organization. So when companies make an investment in ERP, it's important to realize that although a lot of what they are doing is going to be buying computer hardware and software, the real payoff here is what they're trying to accomplish in terms of the way they run their business by running it as this interconnected organization. Comments or questions about that? So having said that, let's talk about what we have seen in terms of how IT has changed over time in organizations. And I'm going to put different numbers with this model just to make it easier for us to discuss. This comes from an article written by Ross and his colleagues in Harvard Business School Press. But in this article, he talks about how IT has changed over time. And in what we will call phase one here, this leftmost column, when technology first came to business, we had these silos of business. And the idea was companies would go out and they would buy IT, but they were buying IT just to help in an individual functional area. Let's buy IT to help the salespeople. Let's buy IT to help the people working in the warehouse. Let's buy a software program that will help us do payroll. So we bought these local IT applications. And all we were trying to do is have it improve the operation of a single functional area. You know, we used to take 10 people to do payroll, and now we can do payroll with only 3 people because we have this computer technology to help us. I can remember not that long ago when, nowadays you're used to the idea that you get paid by having the money directly go into your bank account. Well, that hasn't always been the case. It's not that long ago that it was very common for people on payday to actually get checks. And for a long time, of course, those checks were printed on a computer, but if you went back in time a decade or so before then, companies used to have people that would handwrite payroll checks. And for companies that had large numbers of employees and they'd pay them every 2 weeks or even in some cases once a week, they had large staffs of employees that would calculate how much people should get paid and physically write out and sign the checks. Took a lot of manpower. So we go out and we buy a software tool to help us with this, and now all of a sudden we've become much better at doing payroll. So in era one, we were just trying as a company to improve our ability to execute work in an individual functional area. And so who defined what the computer was supposed to do? The local business leaders. In other words, if we were buying software for the payroll department, the payroll manager would tell us how the computer should work. If we're buying software to help in the warehouse, the people that work in the warehouse tell us what the software is supposed to do. And our whole goal here was we just want things to be better in that one local area, in that one functional area. And that was a good first step. Era one, what I'm calling it here, is a very logical place for bringing technology into an organization and being able to see benefit from it. But that describes the way IT was really quite a few decades ago at this point. So, what followed Era 1? Well, after Era 1 had been around for a while, there was now a realization that maybe there's some virtue in having the ability to share information. You know, back during Era 1, it was all just about helping me in my one functional area. So if I worked in the warehouse, I didn't care whether the software tool helped the salesperson or not. I didn't care if it had anything to do with payroll. It's just about helping me. But now I begin to realize in Era 2, maybe from a technology perspective, if we have this shared platform, it might actually be beneficial to our organization because it would help us reduce our IT cost. Let me give you an example of the way it was in the early days using a more contemporary example. It would be like if one department in an organization was using Windows and another department in the organization was using all Macs and another part of the organization, they didn't have PCs at all, they just did all of their stuff on iPhones. Well, everybody's using different technology and sure it helps them, but none of that can talk to each other. So the idea here is let's start to think in terms of standardizing our technology platform. Let's use the same kinds of computer system and let's start trying to architect things so that they can connect together. And so now, as opposed to this effort being driven just by the managers in the functional areas, now you see companies begin to employ IT professionals to come in and guide the business on how to achieve this shared technology platform. And so now the focus is not necessarily on just making life better in a functional area. Now we want to start gathering some efficiency from this, start operating more effectively as an organization based on this decision to go with standardized technology. So that was Era 2. Most contemporary organizations have passed beyond Era 2, and so let's look at what Era 3 is. Era 3 is the era that we're calling the optimized core. And so here now, as opposed to just all operating using the same fundamental technology, now we move to standardized processes and standardized databases in our organization. So what this says is something that is very, very important and at the heart of what ERP systems are about. We're going to get together as a company and we're going to decide how things should be done. So we're going to put the marketing manager and the payroll manager and key stakeholders in our organization. We're going to get everybody together in a room and we're going to come up with the best way to do a particular task. We've talked about this before, this idea of a business process. So we're going to have a purposeful discussion as an organization about how we are going to do things, and then we are going to optimize our IT to support that. I'm sure most, if not all of you, have had a job before. Probably a wide variety of different kinds of jobs. I used to work when I was in high school in a restaurant. And I can remember there were certain things that we did on a daily basis, and it seemed like everybody who did it differently. One example of that was we sold iced tea to customers as a beverage to drink. And it seemed like one day somebody would make it and they really liked the iced tea to be sweet, so it would be really, really sweet. It would have a lot of sugar in it. And then the next day somebody would like their iced tea stronger, so they would use more tea bags and not put as much sugar in. And if you came to our restaurant 5 days in a row, every day the iced tea would taste different. Well, that's no good. You know, the idea is, as an organization, we wanted to continue my example. We want to decide what our iced tea is supposed to taste like. Those are too similar. We want to decide what our iced tea is supposed to taste like, so that no matter when a customer comes in, the iced tea always tastes the same. The company that was among the first to really emphasize this as the key to their business success is a company a lot of you, I'm sure, are familiar with, McDonald's. The whole idea behind McDonald's and what made them successful was you could walk into a McDonald's anywhere in the world and order a cheeseburger and it would taste the same. It would be fundamentally the same product. Well, the idea here is that we're going to decide as a company, this is the way we make iced tea. This is the way we ship products out, and we do it the same way every time, and we focus our IT on supporting those standardized business processes. And so the idea here is that we are going to be trying to improve the quality of our business operations and also the cost of our business operations. You know, back to the example of making iced tea, sugar's pretty expensive. So the day when we had a worker make iced tea and she would dump like a whole 5-pound bag of sugar in it, that iced tea cost a lot more when somebody else made it and they used half as much. Well, there's lots of things we can think of where once we figure out the best way to do it, we can really optimize things and it becomes much more efficient and much more cost effective for us. So the idea here is we figure out the best way to do something and we use technology to support that so that we improve the cost and we improve the quality. For this to happen, now we need top company management to be involved in this, and we need to designate process leaders. So instead of thinking about having someone who's in charge of the warehouse and someone who's in charge of payroll and someone who's in charge of marketing, although we may still have those people, we also have people that are in charge of entire processes. We have someone who's in charge of order fulfillment. We have someone who's in charge of ongoing product inventory. And so we task individuals in our organizations to be leaders of certain processes, and they and senior management work together to figure out how to optimize our business. And so what we are focused on in IT is making our company as efficient as it possibly can be. If we are Amazon, we want to get the customer's order at 2 p.m. and have it shipped out and sitting on a UPS truck at 2:05 p.m. We want to make that happen as quick as we possibly can. When customers pay us and they send us a check, we want to get that money in our bank account as quick as we possibly can. Because the more time it sits in our bank account, the more money we're going to make in interest. And so the idea here is we want everything to be optimized, and the only way we're going to be able to achieve that is thinking about what's the best way to do things and then supporting that with technology. Questions or comments about this? I think I saw somebody that was going to interject a thought. Yes, sir.
About the process manager or process leaders. Processes cut across different functional groups.
Mm-hmm.
And these functional groups all have their own leaders. Now, a process leader then cuts across those leadership and okay, then he works with the people that are also under the functional group manager to achieve his processes.
Absolutely. What you have described that exactly so. You know, we might, for example, in a really simple organization, we might have 4 different functional areas as described by my 4 different squares. And every one of those functional areas might have a manager in them where he or she is responsible for what happens in that functional area. And that makes perfect sense. But when we have a business process that cuts across these functional areas, it also makes sense for us to put someone in charge of that can focus on coordinating the work and making sure it gets done efficiently and effectively. And so, although you would still have the people running the individual functional areas, I don't know how to draw this picture, but you would have person Y that's in charge of everything here inside of this particular business process. So they can exist, and of course do exist, to cooperate with one another because we're all trying to accomplish the same goal of efficiently and effectively operating our organization. That's why we say you still have senior management involved here, but now you also have this idea of these process leaders in an organization. Good question. Other questions or comments? All right, so everything that we have talked about so far, I think, is very, very straightforward, but now this gets a little bit harder. Once we're in phase 3, which is very, very logical, what's the next step? Where do we go from here? Well, phase 4 is this idea of business modularity. And this now becomes a little bit more challenging. Because, remember a moment ago where I was talking about business processes and I said we need to standardize and optimize our business processes. So here's the idea. We take anything that we do as an organization and we say it consists of 5 different steps. And so we look at those steps, we try and optimize each of those steps, we organize them in the way that we think represents maximum efficiency, which means, for example, that we can do step 1, and then we do step 2, and then we can actually do step 3 and step 4 at the same time. And then once step 3 and 4 are done, then we can do step 5. The whole idea here is we sit down and we figure out the best way to do a particular thing. Whether that's the best way to cook a piece of fried chicken, or the best way to load a truck for shipment, or the best way to do payroll, or the best way to clean the warehouse. We think about what's the best way to do it. That's what we were doing in stage 3. So where do we go from there? Well, where we go from there is we realize that things change. And just because what I put here as the sequence is the best way for us to do it today doesn't necessarily mean that that's going to be the best way to do it 6 months from now or 2 years from now. Things change. You know, maybe, for example, we've always loaded our boxes in a certain way in the warehouse, but now there's a new piece of equipment that we've bought, and we can load boxes more efficiently. But it's going to require us to change our business process. So the idea here behind stage 4, this business modularity, is we want to be able to take our business processes, and we still want to have business processes, but we want to be able to have business processes that are more modular and more plug and play. Plug and play meaning you can walk up to a computer like the one here, a lot of you have laptops, and you can walk up to it and plug in a USB device and give it a few seconds and the computer will recognize it and you can use it. Doesn't matter if you've never plugged that particular device into that computer before, after a few seconds, it's set up for you to be able to use it. Well, in the context of business processes, what I'm saying is we could look at this business process and say, you know what, instead of doing it in this order that we have here, what we can do now that we have this new piece of equipment is we can change the order totally, and we can do step 1, and then we can do steps 2, 3, and 4 in parallel, and we don't even have to do step 5 anymore, and we're done. The whole idea here is we want to be able to re-engineer and rework our business processes very, very quickly. And the reason why we want to be able to do that is because things change. We want to be able to see an opportunity and take advantage of it. As an organization, we want to be very agile, which means that if a new opportunity comes up, we want to be able to take advantage of it right away. A good example of this would be Amazon. When Amazon first got started, they began selling books. And they were quite successful at selling books, and they could have continued on as a company just selling books, and they probably would have been successful. But Jeff Bezos started with a list of things that he thought he could sell online. And so he started with books, and then the next thing he moved to after books, as I recall, was selling music CDs and DVDs and things like that. And then he moved into electronics, and then they moved into toys, and they began to, over time, integrate more and more different products. The idea is, as we see an opportunity on the marketplace, we want to be able to jump on it right away, because that opportunity may go away, or another company might beat us to the market and we lose out on that. So the focus now is, let's get our IT leaders, our business leaders, and other industry partners that we have outside of our company, and let's try and figure out how we can be strategically agile. You know, we make a given product. How can we orient the manufacturing process so that if we come up with a new way of a new design, we can make that design happen really, really quickly? If we invent something new, how can we position our company to be able to take advantage of it very, very quickly? How can we have business processes, but at the same time, always be looking for a better way to do things? And as soon as we find a better way to do things, we make the change. Now, think about this in terms of the way a lot of business software works. A lot of business software is based on, we think about a particular process in our company, and we decide it's going to be done in 5 steps. Step 1, then step 2, then step 3, then step 4, and then step 5. And we write the software that way, and then somebody comes to us and says, we want to change the order of the steps in the process. We want to rework the process. And now all of a sudden we say to ourselves, well, we've got to rewrite the whole software because the software doesn't work the way. You told us you wanted to do these steps in these order, and that's what the software does. Stage 4 in this process, this idea of business modularity, is this idea that we want to orient IT in such a way that is extremely flexible, and so we can go in and make changes very, very quickly in order to have this agility as an organization. I can tell you that most organizations that are contemporary in their IT efforts and are effective in what they do, this is where they would say they are. They would say, we do an okay job with this, but we want to keep getting better and better and better at it. We want to become more agile as an organization, so that literally somebody could come to us and say, I know that we have been doing payroll this way, but we want to change the way we want to do payroll, and IT wants to be able to say, okay, you can start doing that next week. Doesn't work that way in most companies. Most companies, you propose a business process change, you go to IT, and IT says, okay, give us 6 months and we can be ready for that. Companies are trying to improve their cycle time so that they can be more responsive to the demands of the business side of the organization to improve speed and agility. That is significantly easier said than done. So that's where most companies are today. What's stage 5? Stage 5, question, yeah.
For this stage, what are some things? First of all, is it mainly dependent on IT or the process itself? If the process can switch, is it mainly dependent on the platform IT? And 2, for IT, what are some examples of some things that company has done or that you advise that makes them very modular? I mean, quick. For example, I know cloud might help, but what are some things that you've seen IT do that makes them more quick to respond?
Cloud, the one that you cited, is an excellent example, and let me tell you why. For a lot of organizations, even ones that have money, they say, we want to take on this new project. And I was involved in an organization about 1.5 years ago that had this very issue. They said, we want to take on this project. We believe we have the expertise to do this project. But to do this project, we need computer hardware. And they contacted their vendor, and they needed a pretty powerful set of computer systems. And their vendor said, yeah, we'd be glad to sell that to you, but it's going to take us about 6 months to deliver it. That was the cycle time on how long it would take them to get the hardware. And I think a lot of times, a lot of us think about, if I need a new laptop, I go to the Dell website, and a week later I have a new laptop. But when you're buying large business systems, sometimes the time of delivery is measured in weeks or months. So the cloud can be very, very helpful, because literally I could decide I needed a new server farm, and I could spin up 50 servers in the cloud this afternoon if I have the money. And so the cloud is one way that companies can be very, very agile. The cloud is also great because if I need something for a project for a 2-month period, I can use those resources for that 2-month period and then shut it down, and I don't have to keep paying for it, as opposed to if I bought the hardware, now it's mine and I've got to figure out what to do with it. We will talk more about this over the duration of the semester, maybe a little bit today, but thinking in terms of engineering our software products to be service-oriented is a way that can help with this. And I'm out of space on my screen here, so let me go to the whiteboard. If I can find a whiteboard marker.
There's a blue one right here.
Ah, okay, thank you. Hopefully it works. We'll keep our fingers crossed.
I have some of the dozen.
You know, a lot of times when we have thought about creating software products, we tend to think about creating these large monolithic software products that, 10 people are going to work on for 6 months, and it's going to be, hundreds of thousands of lines of code, and it's going to do this one very important thing. Well, service-oriented architecture is the idea of, instead of thinking in terms of creating one monolithic organization, instead what we should be thinking about is creating a pool of services that do a lot of different things. And then when we engineer a software product, we just link those services together, put an interface on it, and we have our new software product. But these services that we have created can be reused and incorporated into other projects. Let me give you an example of this. We make use of a lot of software applications. An example in my scenario here is this would be something like Microsoft Word or Microsoft Excel. Those are very, very complicated, large-scale applications. You know, if I told you your homework for this week is to create your own version of Microsoft Word, you know, you couldn't do that. That clearly represents a lot of work to create something like that. Well, compare that with an app that you might have on your smartphone. And all that app does is, I don't know, tell you the joke of the day, you know, or does one very discrete thing, and that's all it does. You know, you think about on your smart devices, most people, they don't have like one app that they do everything in. On your phone or tablet or whatever, you have 50 or 60 or 100 apps that each do very, very different things, and they just do that one thing, and presumably they do it pretty well. Well, which is easier to write, Microsoft Word or a joke of the day app? You know, joke of the day app, you might be able to write you and a friend in a week, hypothetically. Well, what organizations are starting to do is starting to say, okay, instead of us thinking about creating these large, complicated, monolithic applications, let's think about creating smaller software modules that then we can link together for an organization to be able to accomplish what it is that we're trying to do. That would give us this strategic ability. Or more particularly, it would give us the strategic agility here. So we'll talk more as the semester goes on about this idea of engineering software around services. It embraces really a lot of best practices in software engineering and agile software development, and it can give us the modularity that we're seeking here. Other questions or comments?
That means what organizations are trying to do right now is instead of like building a very big software, they try to source for little softwares which they can combine to meet their market need at certain times, and at the same time they could restructure those software that how possible is that?
It's very possible. I mean, the example I used about the iPhone is a great example. SAP, the software that we're using in lab right now, okay? It clearly has a lot of use in business. A lot of companies use it. A lot of companies are moving away from using the SAP GUI that you've been using, even though they're still using SAP software. And you might say, well, how do they do that? Well, think about the fact that what you have seen in lab is we log into the system, we run these transactions. So far this semester, maybe you guys have run 20 different transactions. There are over 100,000 transactions in that system. No person in the scope of their job would ever run all 100,000 of those transactions. If I worked in the marketing department, I might have 8 transactions that I ran on a regular basis. And that's the only thing I use in the system. So what SAP a number of years ago said was, we know that people love the idea of apps. So how can we move away from the SAP GUI and give people apps instead. So imagine if on your phone you worked for a company and you were the marketing manager.
So,
And your job was to decide how much money to invest, like we're doing for ERP Sim. You have an app on your phone, you click that app, and all that app does is let you set marketing. And you type that in and you hit OK and you're done. That app is very, very easy to write, and it just does one thing. And it makes it really simple. So if you think about it, everything that we have done in the context of ERP Sim, playing it in class, we could have done that with a set of apps, where one app does this, it shows you your sales report. Another app lets you order stuff. Another app lets you change prices. And so at SAP, they have a couple different products that are kind of competing with each other. One of them is called Fiori. Fiori is the Italian word for flowers. And SAP, the idea is they want people to think of SAP Fiori as being beautiful. Now, I think that's a bit of an oversell. I don't think anybody's going to say, wow, this is the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. But let me see if I can show you what SAP Fiori looks like in terms of the user experience. You can run this on your desktop. You can run it on a smart device. And your user interface looks like this. Wow, that is clearly not as big as I would like that to be. Your desktop has tiles all over it. And a lot of the tiles, as you can see here, even have displays on it. And when it's time for you to want to change prices, you click on the tile that says change prices. And it shows you, gives you a screen where you can do that. And in fact, all of these tiles are kept in a tile store, which is conceptually the same idea as an app store. So you go to work for a company, and maybe the first day on the job, they set you up with a desktop, and they give you a set of tiles that they think you're going to need. And over time, you add new tiles or delete tiles that you think you're not going to use. But everything is presented in this very graphical, easy-to-use format where literally every one of these tiles is an app that just does one thing. That's the idea behind Fiori. And the reason why SAP is going this direction is they say we can deliver that to someone on their desktop, we can deliver that to someone on their cell phone, we can deliver that to someone on their iPad or tablet, and it no longer has the same learning curve associated with the SAP GUI the way you guys have seen it. So a lot of companies are moving to this idea. Let me see if I can find, here's another really great screenshot of exactly what I'm saying. Here's your tiles on your computer, and here's your tiles on your iPad, and here's your tiles on your smartphone. And it's now a seamless experience across all those different devices. So that moves us in this direction. We have several of our graduates that have gone to work for a company in this area, and a couple of them are doing development of Fiori apps. This is HTML5, this is JavaScript, and a lot of SQL and database programming. They can create, depending upon the sophistication, functionality like this. You can create one of those tiles in about 2 weeks. That's a very different cycle time than what it would take to create something like a Microsoft Word or Microsoft Excel. That's where the mindset is changing. Companies are moving away from these big monolithic applications. I've been at presentations where SAP vice presidents have gotten up and said, we hate the SAP GUI. It's ugly. It's hard to use. Nobody likes it. I will be glad when we kill it off because it's not good. So SAP and all the other companies that are in this space, they're kind of moving to this idea of we don't need big applications anymore. We need lots and lots of small apps that are really lightweight. And if one day we come in and the world has changed and we no longer need an app, that's not the end of the world. We lost the 2 weeks of development we spent on that, but life goes on. If we have to throw away or re-engineer one of these big applications, there's a lot more angst with that particular decision. Comments or questions? These are good questions. This gets right to the heart of what we're talking about in this class. So let's look at stage 5. Stage 5, you would be very hard pressed to find a company that is in stage 5 today. Because stage 5 almost represents a dream of how we envision IT in the future. We live in a business environment right now where in a lot of industries, companies buy and sell parts of their company. You know, we're in an environment right now where here in the Tri-Cities area, some of the big medical healthcare providers are getting ready to come together and become one organization. Very, very common for one company to buy another company. Well, what does that mean when that happens in terms of IT? In IT, here's company 1, here's company 2, and here's company 3, and company 3 just bought company 1 and company 2. So we're all one big happy family now, we're all one big company. What kind of headache do the IT professionals face as a result of this?
Different systems from
Different systems, different vendors, things aren't compatible. You know, this company right here was running SAP, this company's been running Microsoft, this company's running Oracle. You know, we'll throw company 4 into the mix, which has a lot of custom developed software that they created on their own. I've talked to a lot of IT professionals that when the CEO gets up and announces, and next week we're going to be buying another company, they groan because they know that that means a lot more work for them. Because it's very, very painful to try and take systems that were engineered to be not compatible. Make no mistake about it. Although SAP will tell you that you can connect their software up to other things, they don't want to make it super easy for you to interface with other systems, because then you might stop using their system and switch to those other systems. So all these companies develop these systems to be compatible, but at the same time, it's not like you just plug in a USB drive into your laptop and boom, it works. Stage 5 says that it does. Stage 5 says that when we have a business partner, we can plug their technology into our technology as easy it is to plug a USB drive into our laptop. Plug it in, beep, it works. Okay? Are we anywhere close to that in IT right now? Not at all. It's like, and I don't know a lot about railroads, but it's my understanding that if you look back historically, the way the railroad system in the US works and the way the railroad system works in the Soviet Union is different because the width of the railroad tracks is different. And they were purposely engineered to be different widths because the Americans were afraid if the Russians ever took over, they'd try and put Russian trains on our train tracks, and they could use that as a way of warfare. So we made our train tracks purposely different widths so it wouldn't be compatible with the Russian railway system. So we see a lot of that in IT. So the goal of 5 is, you know, in 4, we're talking about agility. We're talking about wanting to be able to take on new things fast. Well, what's the epitome of that? The epitome of that is being able to go out on Monday and say, hey, company A, we like you. Would you be okay if we bought you? And company A says, yeah, we like you too. Buy us. We'll be one happy family. and we hug on Tuesday, and on Wednesday our lawyers get together and we do the deal, and on Thursday we hook our two IT systems together, and on Friday we're ready to do business. It does not work that way. You know, when a company buys another company, IT professionals will work for months, if not years, getting those systems to cooperate with one another and making it so they can effectively exchange information. And we're talking about this idea about efficient business processes. How efficient are your business processes going to be if you're trying to hook together two computer systems that fundamentally don't want to be hooked together? That's the problem we've got to solve. And the reason why we have to solve it is because this idea of putting companies together and taking companies apart is part of contemporary business practices. Just as much as a company today will buy another organization, sometimes organizations will spin off or sell parts of their company. They'll say, you know, we in the past have sold this particular product. It's still a good product, but we don't want to sell it anymore, so we'll sell that division to another company so that we make money off of that and then we can focus on other things. Well, if we're going to sell off part of our company, it would be nice and we would get more value from that sale if the company that buys us can easily integrate that into their operations. So, what we are trying to have happen, what we are trying to create, is this idea of organic reconfiguration. Meaning, pretty much what I described a few moments ago, where just like this outlet here on the wall, I don't really know all the details of how electricity works. I understand some of the concepts of it, but I don't have to be an electrical engineer to plug something into the outlet. And I know with pretty good confidence that when I plug something into that outlet, I'm going to get electricity to do what I need to do. And I can bring in a vacuum and plug it in here and it'll work. Well, in the future, I want to be able to, if you will, bring in a computer system and hook it to another computer system and have them talk to each other and have them automatically be able to exchange information and collaborate and cooperate without me having to do a whole lot of extra work. Are we anywhere close to that in contemporary IT? No. Do we see that like being right around the corner and probably 6 months from now we'll have that? No. But if we look 50 years into the future, we would hope that that's the way IT would work. That's kind of the next step in this journey if we ever really are going to be able to accomplish all the things that business people want us to accomplish. We're going to be able to provide this kind of organic reconfiguration. Now, what's interesting about this is, think about how much easier this becomes with cloud. Okay, let's imagine that my company is a pretty big company. We're company number one. And we have all of our resources, for the most part, in the Amazon cloud. And we buy company number two, and their resources are in the Amazon cloud. At least one thing we don't have to worry about is picking up their computers and moving them to our building and plugging them in. You know, we don't have to worry about moving around the equipment and setting up our server rooms and redoing the network wiring and all of that. With it being on the cloud, pretty much we just need to know IP addresses and username and passwords, and we can start using those systems just like we can our own. So we have some things going in our favor that are steps this direction, but we still are nowhere close to this idea of organic reconfiguration. What's it going to take for this to ever happen? Where you're going to have IT people involved in this, you're going to have business leaders involved in this. You're also going to have the industries as a whole, and software development companies and hardware development companies getting together to make this work. You know, we have this with hardware. You can buy a hard drive from any number of different manufacturers, plug it into your motherboard, and it'll work. Your motherboard doesn't care what brand the hard drive is, nor does the hard drive care what brand the motherboard is. They've been engineered from the ground up to be cooperative with one another. We have to start thinking about software that way. That's going to require a significant shift in how we think about developing software. That is the future, or at least that's the future that is envisioned. But the reason why I said we're nowhere close to this yet is because the realities that you've all realized about where we are and how we create software. Questions or comments about this? So I would suggest to you that, like the little check mark here illustrates, where most companies are right now is in this business modularity, and they're trying to figure out how to achieve steps towards dynamic venturing, at least in terms of the things that they work on a regular basis. Comments, questions?
I guess by stage 5 security would be worked out.
Well, clearly what would not happen is we would not be saying, oh, nobody cares about security. You know, clearly we have to have security here, so we'd have to figure that out. You know, no, certainly I'm not suggesting, nor is anybody else suggesting this is going to be easy. And the reason why it's hard is because what does security look like in this environment? We talked back here, even in stage 4, about this idea of being able to plug together different modules, and I mentioned a moment ago about that even means connecting our systems with those of our business partners. Well, if I'm going to hook my computer system up to a vendor's computer system for the sake of automatic ordering, that certainly doesn't mean that those two computer systems should be able to access any of the data the other one has. So as soon as we start thinking about connecting stuff together, security absolutely comes to the forefront here. And in fact, where a lot of organizations are wrestling now, and I've talked with several of them that are trying to figure out how to fix this, is the way they have approached security in the past, they've kind of painted themselves in the corner because they've handled it through things like roles, and now you have an employee that has like 150 different roles assigned to him or her, and it's too complicated for the system to manage, and people have the ability to do things they shouldn't, and people have don't have the ability to do things they should, and they have a hard time figuring out how to do that. You know, if we think about ERP SIM, you want to be able to look at the financial reports and set prices for your company. Others playing ERP SIM want to be able to use the same system you are and do the same kinds of things, but for a different company. Well, that's a very real world organizational thing. If I'm the sales manager of the Southern Division, I should have a lot of latitude to look at information about the Southern Division, but not the Northern Division and the Western Division. So as systems have become more sophisticated, managing security has become more complicated as opposed to easier. So that's one of the things here. You know, even if we could technically hook the two systems together, what do we do about the security dimension of that? It's a huge problem. Other comments or questions?
Won't you also have to, those large application developers that we were talking about, aren't they gonna have to give a little bit or become friends or something for that to happen in the future?
See, the whole idea is, in theory, you know, a lot of this is in theory, is if we move away from these monolithic applications and instead we think about creating smaller discrete apps, well then when I merge with another company, we kind of compare our pool of apps. We probably have a lot of overlaps. We probably have some things that we need to delete, but it becomes much easier for us to put our pool of apps next to their pool of apps and try and make those smaller pieces work than to re-engineer these larger applications. It's kind of like, what would you rather do? Take apart an airplane and put it back together, or take apart a yo-yo and put it back together. I mean, one of them you can do really, really quickly because there's just not a lot of complexity. The other is almost impossible. Other comments, questions? Okay, so I'm going to skip over some slides here. And we're kind of just continuing this. So here's what we have seen. And this ties in very nicely with the last slide, even though it's from an entirely different presentation. We're jumping into, if you will, the history of computers in the 1990s in this diagram. Because the 1990s is when ERP started showing up. And so in the 1990s, companies bought these ERP systems. And consistent with one of the articles that you read earlier this semester, companies started to look at, let's define our business processes, let's re-engineer our business processes, let's make our company operationally efficient. That was the focus of the 90s. And most companies that have any sophistication have already passed that era by. Now, I will tell you, there are still companies today that are looking for operational efficiency. I had a student come up after class, this is probably about 3 years ago, and tell me, I was just hired by a company. He was still a student. He said, I was just hired by a company. They are thinking about buying an ERP system, and they want me to help them do some of the background research and figure out our business processes and be involved in the acquisition and configuration of that software system. Great experience for him. Well, that company, even though that happened in around 2015, they were where a lot of other companies were in the 1990s. They were just kind of lagging behind contemporary technology. Well, where the companies are that are where the dominant IT players are in this era, now they have moved beyond focusing on operational efficiency and business process engineering. Now they are what we were just talking about. We need to figure out how to be agile. It's kind of the idea, and this is obviously an absurd example, of the boss coming in and saying, okay, I know that what we have been doing is making and selling cars. But starting next week, we're going to make and sell airplanes. We're getting out of the car business, and we're starting to sell airplanes next week, okay? You can't do that. I mean, that's practically impossible. But what we want to be able to do in business today is we want to be able to see a new opportunity and jump on it immediately. And we now recognize something about business that we didn't necessarily recognize in the era of the 90s. And that is, in the 90s, when we thought about business processes, we thought about them kind of like this diagram suggests, where this step right here might be something done in our warehouse. And this step right here might be something done by our accounting people. And this step right here might be something done by our salespeople. But the point is, every one of those steps was done inside of our company. Now we realize that it doesn't necessarily work that way anymore. Now, when we think about a business process, here's step one, and it's done by us. Here's step two, and it's done by one of our partner companies in Chile. And here's step three. This is done by one of our partner companies in Texas. And this guy over here, this is UPS, who handles the delivery of our packages for us. And so now we've begun to realize that in a lot of real-world applications, business processes don't just happen within the confines of our company. We actually are collaborating in this network of related companies. You know, if I make cars, I don't make every part of that car. The tires on that car, I probably get from Michelin. And the glass for the windshields and for the windows come from a glass manufacturer. And other components of that car come from partner companies. Boeing builds aircraft. And we may watch a video about this a little bit later in the semester if we have time. But to build even a single aircraft involves work from dozens of companies coming together to build that one plane. So we now are in an environment where business processes, we really can no longer think of them as just happening in our company. They're happening in a collection of companies that now need to collaborate. And this business network, and the idea here is we're talking about business network not in the sense of like Wi-Fi and other things like that. We're talking about business network just in the sense of businesses that are connected, not necessarily in terms of physical wiring or Wi-Fi, but just in terms of their operation. We have a network of companies that have come together, and it's a very, very fluid alliance. I worked for a company a number of years ago that did retailing, and they shipped out products using UPS. Now this happened a long time ago. Probably none of you would even remember this, but there was a period where UPS went on strike. And UPS drivers, I forget, UPS went on strike for at least a couple weeks where they weren't delivering anything. Well, this company that I was working for at the time had very, very seasonal shipment of products. It's kind of like a candy company around Halloween. When this company looked at their shipment model, there were 3 times a year when they shipped out significant amounts of products. And they had about a 3-week window to fulfill a substantial portion of their annual sales. And Murphy's Law came into play. UPS went out on strike during one of these windows. Well, what do? First of all, you say, well, it's no big deal, call up FedEx. Well, you can imagine if UPS goes on strike, what does every company that uses a UPS do? They pick up the phone and they call FedEx. So FedEx got to the point where they weren't taking on new customers, at least new customers of any size, because they couldn't do it. So what do you do in this situation? Well, you figure something out. And in fact, what we had to do was we had to hire independent teams of truckers to pick up packages at our central warehouse, drive them to different regional points around the United States, and then offload them to the U.S. Postal Service to deliver from there. It took a lot of reworking of our logistics process. It was very, very painful. Well, anymore, you could see that same thing happening with a company where they just decide, you know what, maybe we can get a better deal if we switch from UPS to FedEx. And so managers get together, they take a few meetings, and 2 weeks later they walk in and say, okay, next week we start shipping everything out by FedEx. The point of my example is we live in an environment now where not only are we looking at federations of companies coming together to work collaboratively, but we're looking at, on an ongoing basis, people leaving the partnership and new people coming in. This kind of goes back to what we were talking before about how can we accommodate that in as efficient a manner as possible. So that's what companies are looking for right now. They're looking for ways to support businesses coming together and being able to effectively collaborate to provide this business agility. And it forces us to rethink the role of IT here. IT has to become inherently more flexible and more open and more understanding of real-world business processes. And this is where we are today. This is the challenge that most companies face in terms of IT. And when you talk to people that work in IT, for a lot of organizations, you don't hear things like, man, I hate my job because I've been doing the same thing for the last 10 years. What instead you hear is, man, my job has changed so much in the last 6 months, and it's probably going to change a lot more in the next 6 months because of how business anymore changes so radically, depending upon who our partners are and what it is that we are doing in these various processes. So that's the challenge. How do we address this? Well, this gets to the heart of this crude diagram I put on the whiteboard a moment ago.
Sorry,
Yeah.
This challenge is the same as the challenge we're trying to address at stage 5.
Yes, absolutely. Same challenge. So here on the left, just focus on this guy over here so far. This is the way we thought about applications traditionally. We knew there was virtue in having a database, and we would put all of our important corporate information into that database and have this shared persistent data store. And that's worked well for us. Then we would craft these large applications. And these large applications would incorporate a lot of business logic. They would incorporate a user interface. Now maybe we use a multi-tiered architecture. Maybe it's monolithic like this is illustrating. But the point is, we thought in terms of creating very, very few applications and very, very large applications. And if you think about what ERP professes to be, it's a large application that lets you do everything in your organization. That's a pretty big challenge to take on. That has proven to be very, very hard for supporting modularity. It was great at supporting standardized technology. And it was great at helping us optimize things in our organization. That worked, and it still works today. But it doesn't give us the flexibility and the modularity that we need. So how do we solve that? We change our way of thinking about what we are going to create in development. Now, we still have our database. Database is still relevant, still good. We might be able to introduce some new techniques like column store databases and new technologies there. But the idea behind a database is very, very robust and persistent, and nobody's come up with anything better. So we still have the database here. But now, instead of creating these huge applications, what we're going to think about is creating this thing right here that looks to me like a stained glass pizza or something. And what that is if this database right here is a collection of data, all of which is different pieces of data, but they all coexist in that database. This is an enterprise service repository, which is like a database, but instead of storing data, it stores functionality. And so we create this repository of services. So for example, maybe I want to create a software tool that allows end users to do banking. The old thing I would do is I would come over here and I would say, I'm going to create a software product like Quicken. And I'm going to create a monolithic application that gives the user all of this functionality around banking. And I can still do this today. Or I could say, you know what, instead, I'm going to create a bunch of different small services, like get bank balance, make deposit, withdraw money, check stock price. And I take all the things that were engineered before into my large application, and I make them standalone services. And the great thing about this is, once I figure out what those services could be, I could have a team of developers, each of which takes different services and works on them simultaneously. And so then what happens is, when I want to create an application, see, software engineering tells us a lot of things that we've ignored. Software engineering tells us that we need to be more like engineers in our approach to software development. When an engineer says, I'm going to sit down and build a radio, or I'm going to sit down and build a computer, they don't sit down with a pile of metal and say, okay, I got to figure out how to make this metal into a radio. They sit down with a bunch of components. They sit down with capacitors and resistors and all kinds of different things like that, and they hook them together to make a radio. Well, the idea here is that's the way we're going to start making our software. We're going to create all of these different services, and then when it comes time to make an application, we're going to go into our enterprise services repository. We're going to pull out the services that are already there, that are known good solutions. We're going to have those as resources we could employ. We might need to create a few new services, but instead of creating software from scratch, like the engineer in my example with a pile of metal, we're going to create our software by hooking together these components to create what are called composite applications. Composite applications, by the way, are also very commonly called apps. And the idea is not necessarily a reference to what you have on your phone, but the idea, very, very lightweight, simple applications that can be brought together very, very rapidly to create a program. This process means we get away from the concept of programming, although we still do have programming here, and we think of ourselves more in terms of orchestration. Orchestration is just the idea, you want to create an orchestra, you go out and find people that play all the instruments that you want in your orchestra, and you bring them together, and you pick a piece of music, and you all rehearse that and play it. Well, the idea here is I want to create an application that doesn't exist before. I go into my database, see what data I have available. I go into my service repository, find what services I have available. I hook them together, and I create this composite application, and I can do this very, very, very quickly. Now, you've seen this before, probably. If you have ever used like a rapid prototyping tool, that's the idea here. SAP used to market a product. They took it off of the market because supposedly there's a better product that they're going to follow it with, but they've been slow to get it to market. They had a product we used to use in projects for this class that was one of the coolest things I've ever seen. It's called Visual Composer. Visual Composer, you could literally sit down with a screen, and if a user said to you, I need a web application where you collect this information from the user and then you create these reports, you could create that web app in about 20 minutes. Because you'd go into the database and you'd say, oh, here's the different fields I need. You'd drag that into your workspace, you'd click a button, and dynamically a form would be created that would capture all the data in the appropriate form because it would query the database and know the specs of the data. And then you'd have different services that you could apply to sort the data, to filter the data, to error check the data, or whatever have you. And it was very, very simple to design a real-world application in a very, very short period of time. See, what we have gotten used to the idea that when someone comes to us and says, I need you to make me a piece of software, we think in terms of weeks, months, or maybe years. What this philosophy says is, if we change the way we work, and we think more in terms of creating small pieces that over time we can reuse and hook together to build all kinds of different things, that over time we build up this robust enterprise service repository, and we can start thinking about creating applications in days or maybe weeks as opposed to months and years. And that's what companies are looking to do in their IT practices. Now, very easy to say, very hard to make happen, but this is the future of IT. This is the future of development. This is when software engineering truly becomes software engineering. When an engineer is designing a bridge, they don't say, well, gee, I guess I'll have to think about building a bridge from scratch, like it's a new endeavor that no one's ever done before. No, they look at bridges that have been in the past. They say, I like that idea, that idea, that idea, that idea. They combine it together, and their bridge is designed in a very short period of time because they reuse known good solutions and they reuse already existing components. Now, think about what we were saying. If we can move to this kind of structure for enterprise IT, I think you would say we stand a much better chance of achieving the hooking together of computer systems and having them just work. This seems to be a much better potential for that than this could ever be. Because this right here gets very, very unsustainable very quickly. By the way, you know who has seen this and has moved this direction? This is a great example of how Microsoft has rethought Microsoft Windows. Microsoft used to think of Windows as these large applications, and every few years they would try and get their customers to upgrade to the newest version of their operating system. What's Microsoft said now? Microsoft has said now, look, instead of that, you just pay us a little bit of money, maybe on an annual basis for a subscription, and we're going to go in over time and we're going to start adding new pieces. We're going to start adding new resources as we develop them a little piece at a time. So over the course of a year, you have all this new functionality, but you didn't get it in terms of one large application. You got a little piece here, a little piece here, a little piece here, a little piece here, and that's reflective of Microsoft's changing approach to how they're thinking about operating systems. Really, Linux has always operated that way. Comments, questions, thoughts about this? I'm skipping over some slides because I know we have limited time left and I'm just looking for some logical thoughts. So let's kind of rewind and recap some of the things we've been saying. Company goes out, they buy an ERP system. Probably a good thing. But that does not in any way guarantee that that company is going to be successful. Just like, and maybe I've used this analogy before because I think it's so apt, two race car drivers driving very similar race cars over time will tend to get very different results. One of those drivers will tend to finish at the front of the pack while the other driver will tend to finish at the rear of the pack. It's not about the car, it's about the driver. ERP, it's not about the system, but it's about how we use that system and how we leverage the information. So you can have two companies, exact same technology, widely different results. This thought about distinctiveness is an important one, but I can't do justice to it in the 5 minutes we have left. So we will have to come back and talk about that at some point in the future. I think this probably represents a good place for us to stop in terms of thinking about content for your midterm. Be aware that you should expect very, very broad questions about, and this is off the top of my head, why is the development of large monolithic software applications no longer thought to be a good idea by many organizations? What steps could a company take to move towards improved business process agility? What are we trying to accomplish when we say we want to be more agile as a company? What is an ERP system? What are some of the things an ERP system could do that would benefit our organization? I really like questions like, your boss comes to you and says, we're thinking about buying a new ERP system. Give me 4 reasons why you think that might be a good idea and 4 reasons why you think that might not be a good idea. Okay? I think if you'll look back through the things that we have talked about and go over it, I really suggest the virtue of going over it with a classmate or a team of classmates and talking through it, because they may have picked up on something that you might not have, and that can be very helpful. But this is what we're looking at for content for the midterm exam. Questions, comments, anything before we call our time today to a close? Yes, sir.
Is this class recorded?
Mm-hmm. And the class, there was 1 week that the I think it was the very first week that the recording was corrupted, but this afternoon I uploaded last week's class, and I will work on having today's class up hopefully sometime tomorrow, but if not tomorrow, I'll try and get it up shortly thereafter. But I'll work on that because I know you'll want this for the sake of studying. Okay? Other questions? Okay, as you are studying, if you run into questions, please do not hesitate to send me an email. I want to see all of you do well on the exam, which means I want to, more fundamentally, I want all of you to understand this stuff so that you can use it in the future to your benefit. So if there's anything that you would benefit from me explaining again or going over, please do not hesitate to ask me. I am happy to do that, okay? So have a good afternoon, a good Friday, and a good weekend, and I'll see you. Well, I might not see you next week, actually, but I'll see you sometime soon.